The Titanic was the largest liner in the world during its maiden voyage. Its size amazed contemporaries. The ship had 4 smokestacks, though only 3 were functional, while the 4th was installed for symmetry and visual effect. It was 269 meters long and weighed 46,328 tons. The ship was so large that even the biggest ports of that time struggled to accommodate it, and new docks had to be built specifically for its service. There were approximately 2,208 people on board, including passengers and crew. Passengers were divided into 3 classes: first class for the elite, second class for the middle class, and third class for workers and emigrants who had more modest conditions. The ship was called unsinkable, but this belief turned out to be fatal. The ship had a unique system of watertight compartments, which engineers believed made it nearly invincible. However, this did not account for the possibility of multiple breaches. The Titanic collided with an iceberg on April 14, 1912, at 11:40 p.m. ship's time. The iceberg was spotted too late, and although the crew tried to avoid the collision, the ship was fatally struck on its starboard side. The iceberg weighed about 300,000 tons. The iceberg that the Titanic struck was larger than the ship itself and posed a serious threat to navigation, but it was difficult to spot at night. The liner sank 2 hours and 40 minutes after the collision. After the impact, the ship gradually took on water due to breaches in several compartments. While the flooding initially seemed manageable, the process sped up once the ship broke apart. The water temperature at the time of the disaster was -2 degrees Celsius, 28 degrees Fahrenheit. The cold North Atlantic water quickly paralyzed and killed people who could not get into lifeboats in time. There were only 20 lifeboats on board. The liner had lifeboats for only half of the people on board. At the time, this was considered normal, as it was assumed that other ships would quickly come to the rescue. Many lifeboats left the ship half empty due to panic and chaos. During the evacuation, people were panicked, and many lifeboats left with fewer people than they could hold, leading to more deaths. 705 people survived, most of whom were rescued by the ship Carpathia. The British liner Carpathia arrived to help and saved those still alive in the lifeboats. Unfortunately, by the time it arrived, most people in the water had already died. The orchestra continued playing during the sinking to calm passengers. This fact has become a symbol of courage and dedication, as the musicians played until the end to maintain calm amid the chaos on board. Captain Edward Smith went down with the ship. He chose not to leave the ship and stayed on the bridge, fulfilling his duty to the end, which made him a national hero in Britain. The ship sent out an SOS signal just 15 minutes after the collision. Despite the rapidly worsening situation, the distress signal was sent with a slight delay, as the crew initially underestimated the severity of the damage. Women and children were given priority in lifeboat boarding. At the time, the women and children first rule was strictly followed, which increased their chances of survival compared to men. Billionaire John Jacob Astor IV died in the disaster. One of the richest men on board, John Astor, was traveling with his young pregnant wife, who survived. He stayed behind to give others space in the lifeboats. The Titanic was part of a trio of ships. Sister ships Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic were designed as the flagships of British shipping. However, only the Olympic had a long and successful career, while the Britannic also sank during World War I. The liner split in 2 before sinking. Before the Titanic went to the bottom, it broke in half due to the immense pressure of water flooding into the ship through the breaches. At the time of the disaster, there were 9 dogs on board. Several wealthy passengers traveled with their pets, but only 3 of the dogs survived, as they were small enough to be carried into lifeboats. Milvina Dean, the youngest passenger on board, was the last living witness of the disaster. She was just 9 weeks old when she boarded the Titanic and lived a long life, passing away in 2009 at the age of 97. The first wreckage of the Titanic was discovered only in 1985. It took 73 years for an international expedition led by Robert Ballard to find the wreckage of the ship at a depth of over 3,800 meters, 12,500 feet. James Cameron's 1997 film revived interest in the Titanic's story. The movie Titanic became one of the most successful films in history, winning 11 Academy Awards and significantly renewing public interest in the ship's tragic tale. The Titanic had 16 watertight compartments. These compartments were designed to protect the liner from flooding, but 5 were breached in the collision, making sinking inevitable. Around 1,500 people died in the disaster.